My name is Daniel. I was a new night shift nurse at St. Sentinel Hospital. It's a century-old building, the kind where the walls seem to breathe when the lights go out. It was 3 a.m. when the call bell for room 304 started ringing. I didn't know it was the beginning of my last night on Earth. The fourth floor had been closed for renovations for 6 months. No patients, no furniture, just dust and silence. But the red light on my panel was pulsing like a bleeding eye. When I stepped off the elevator, the air hit me. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy, thick. I walked into room 304. The room was stripped bare, except for a single bedside table. On it sat a steaming cup of coffee. The steam was rising in the frozen air. I touched the cup. It wasn't hot. It was sticky. I looked at my fingers. It wasn't coffee. It was fresh, dark human blood. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. As I ran down the corridor, I glanced at the patient charts hanging on the walls. Every single one had my name on it. Patient, Daniel. Status, deceased. I hit the elevator button for the ground floor. I just wanted out. The doors slid shut. I felt the descent. The doors opened. My blood turned to ice. I was looking at the same dark corridor. Room 304 was right there. The smell of rotting medicine filled my nose again. I ran for the stairs. I flew down 3 flights, 2 flights, 1, but every door I opened led back to the same place, the 4th floor. I was trapped in a loop, a prison made of concrete and shadows. A child's sob echoed from the end of the hallway. I saw a small shadow slip through a heavy steel door. I followed. It wasn't a room. It was a hidden service elevator. It plummeted down deeper than the blueprints allowed, stopping at basement level 3. The doors opened to a nightmare. Massive glass jars lined the walls, filled with human parts. A vintage projector was flickering on the far wall. The black and white footage showed doctors from the 1920s performing horrific experiments on human brains. Suddenly, the lead doctor in the video stopped. He turned his head and looked directly at me. Through the screen, he smiled, his face beginning to rot and peel in real time. He reached a skeletal hand toward the camera lens, tried to pull himself into my world. I screamed and scrambled back into the elevator. The elevator shot back up. Room 304. Again, I stumbled into the bathroom to splash water on my face, try to wake up from this fevered dream. I looked into the mirror. I wasn't there. In the reflection, standing in my clothes, was a rotting doctor from the 1920s video. He moved when I moved. He breathed when I breathed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't a victim. I was an echo, a memory created in that basement lab 100 years ago. Every night, I think I'm Daniel. And every night, I discover I'm dead. Footsteps, real footsteps. The elevator dings. A young, living nurse steps out, clutching her clipboard. She looks terrified, staring toward room 304. I realize then I was the one who pressed the call bell. I am the thing that haunts this floor. I walked up behind her. I wanted to ask for help, but as she turned around, I saw her name tag. It was my mother's name. She looked exactly as she did in the old photos from my childhood. She looked into my eyes, and instead of her son, she saw a monster. She let out a scream that tore through the hospital. I tried to scream Mom, but only a guttural, inhuman screech came out. My name is Marcus, and I worked a graveyard shift at a secluded gas station off Route 66. Out there, The desert wind is the only thing you hear after midnight. It was 3:15 a.m., the hour when the world feels thin and reality starts to fray at the edges. I was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone, when the bell chimed. The automatic double doors slid open. I looked up, ready to say my usual welcome, but there was no one, just the empty, pitch-black parking lot and the cold wind whistling through the pumps. The door stayed open for 5 seconds, then slid shut. Probably just a sensor glitch, I muttered to myself. But then it happened again. 10 seconds later, the door slid open. Again, the pavement outside was empty. This time, the motion sensor didn't just beep, it screamed. The high-pitched alarm echoed to the tile store, refusing to stop. That's when the temperature dropped. I could see my own breath misting in the air. Suddenly, from the far end of aisle 3, I heard a crinkle. A bag of chips flew off the shelf, hitting the floor with a loud snap. Then another, and another. It was as if someone was walking down the aisle, violently sweeping everything onto the floor. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted, grabbing the baseball bat I kept under the register. No answer, just the sound of heavy, wet footsteps on the linoleum moving slowly toward me. But I couldn't see a thing. I lunged to the security monitor, my hands shaking so hard I could barely move the mouse. I rewound the footage from the front door. What I saw made my heart stop. On the screen, a tall, distorted shadow was standing right in front of the automatic doors. It wasn't a man. It was a silhouette of something that looked like a man, but with limbs that were far too long. Its head was tilted at a 90-degree angle. Every time the door opened, the shadow didn't move forward. It just stood there, frantically waving its long, spindly arm, signaling me to come outside. I looked at the live feed. The shadow was still there on the screen, but when I looked at the actual glass door with my own eyes, the parking lot was empty. It was only visible through the camera. Then the shadow stopped waving. It slowly raised a finger and pointed at the monitor, at the very screen I was watching. It knew I was looking. Suddenly, a loud bang erupted from the back of the store. The power cut out. The only light left was a dim, flickering glow of the backup generator. In the silence, I heard a voice. It wasn't coming from the store. It was coming from the intercom system, the one customers use at the pumps. "Marcus." It whispered, a dry, raspy sound like sandpaper on bone. "Marcus, the door is locked. I can't get in. Come out and help me. I'm so cold." I froze. My name isn't on my uniform. I don't have a name tag. I looked back at the monitor. The shadow was no longer at the door. It was gone. I felt a moment of relief until I saw the motion sensor light above my head turn red. I slowly turned around. On the dusty surface of the counter, right next to my hand, for words were being traced by an invisible finger, appearing in the dust letter by letter. "I am behind you." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I felt a cold, wet hand rest on my shoulder, and the smell of old, stagnant water filled my lungs. The last thing I heard before the world went black was the chime of the front door opening one last time. My name is Elias, and for 15 years, I've worked as a night security guard. I thought I had seen everything, but nothing prepared me for the night at the Miller Textile Factory. The place is a graveyard of rusted iron and heavy shadows, especially at 2 a.m. when the only sound is the hum of the old power grid. It was a Tuesday. I was doing my usual rounds through Sector 4, the oldest part of the factory. As my flashlight cut through the gloom, I saw someone. A man was standing at the far end of the row, bent over machine 12. He was wearing a bright blue uniform, the kind the workers used to wear decades ago. "Hey, shift ended 4 hours ago. What are you still doing here?" I shouted. The man didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just kept working, his hands moving in a frantic, rhythmic motion, though the machine was switched off. I started walking toward him, my heavy boots echoing on the concrete. "Sir, I'm talking to you," I said, getting closer. The air around him was different. It didn't smell like oil or cotton. It smelled like copper and burnt hair. When I was just 10 feet away, he stopped moving. He stood perfectly still, his back still turned to me. I noticed something horrific. The back of his blue uniform was shredded, and the fabric was stained with a dark, crusty substance that looked like old blood. Feeling a surge of adrenaline, I pulled out my radio. I kept my eyes on him while I buzzed the main control room. "Control, this is Elias. I've got a trespasser in Sector 4. Looks like a worker in an old blue uniform. Who else is on the schedule tonight?" There was a long silence, filled with static. Then, the supervisor's voice came through, sounding thin and distorted. "Elias, there's nobody in Sector 4. The power to those machines was cut years ago. And Elias, we haven't issued blue uniforms since the accident in 2006. My heart skipped a beat. "What accident?" I whispered. "A worker named Thomas was dragged into Machine 12. His uniform got caught in the gears. They couldn't stop the machine in time. It tore him apart." "Why do you ask?" I looked up from my radio. The space where the man had been standing was empty. Just the cold, rusted metal of the machine remained. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, turning to leave. Suddenly, a deafening roar shook the floor. Machine 12, which had no power, suddenly lurched to life. The gears began to spin at a violent speed, sparks flying into the dark. I watched in horror as the empty air in front of the machine began to bleed. Thick, crimson liquid sprayed from the gears as if an invisible body was being crushed inside them right now. Then I heard it, a wet, gurgling scream echoing through the entire warehouse. I turned to run, but my foot caught on something. I looked down. It was a scrap of a blue uniform pinned under my boot. As I watched, the fabric began to pull. Something invisible was dragging the cloth and me toward the spinning gears of Machine 12. I clawed at the floor, my fingernails bleeding against the concrete. Just as I was inches away from the blades, the machine stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I looked up, and right there, inches from my face, was a pair of blue sleeves hanging from the machine's teeth. There was no body inside them, but the sleeves reached out and wrapped around my throat. "Help me?" A voice rasped from inside the empty uniform. "It's still turning." I broke free and ran until my lungs burned, never looking back. I quit the next morning. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the sound of those gears grinding, waiting for the next person to wear the blue uniform. My name is Leo, and I host the Graveyard Shift on K-Shadow Radio. Most nights, it's just me, a thermos of black coffee, and the soft glow of the mixing board. But last Friday, the airwaves caught something they weren't supposed to. It started at 2:42 a.m. I was playing a classic rock set when the studio's internal intercom crackled to life. It's supposed to be used to the front desk to talk to the booth, but the front desk was empty. I heard a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, followed by a low, rhythmic whispering in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded ancient, guttural, and full of hate. I switched off the intercom, thinking it was just frequency interference. But then the phone lines lit up, a single caller. I usually don't take live calls this late, but the red light was blinking with strange, frantic intensity. I hit the button and slid the fader up. K-Shadow Radio, you're on the air with Leo. What's on your mind? Silence. Then a heavy, wet breathing. It's happening, Leo. A man's voice whispered. He sounded calm, but it was a terrifying, hollow kind of calm. I can feel the glass. It's so sharp. It's cutting through my chest right now. The steering column is crushing my ribs. I can smell the gasoline mixing with my own blood. I felt a chill run down my spine. Sir, are you in trouble? Do you need me to call 911? It's too late for that. The voice continued, getting weaker. I'm looking at the station window right now. I'm in a black sedan that just hit the pole. I can see you, Leo. You're wearing that blue headset. You're looking at the phone, but you're not looking at me. I froze. My hands were shaking as I stood up and walked toward the large studio window that overlooked the main road. Just outside the station gates, under a flickering streetlight, a black sedan was wrapped around a concrete utility pole. Smoke was pouring from the twisted hood. I see the car, I whispered into my mic, my voice trembling. Hang on, I'm calling for help. Wait, Leo, the voice interrupted. Don't look at the car yet. Look at the tape recorder on your desk. I looked down. My backup reel-to-reel recorder, which only records my live broadcasts, was spinning, but it wasn't recording. It was playing back, a broadcast from exactly 10 years ago. It was my father's voice, the former host of this very show, describing the exact same accident. Every word, every gasp for air, was identical to what the caller was saying right now. Check the caller ID, Leo. The voice hissed. I looked down at the digital display on the console. The number wasn't a local one. It was my own home phone number, the one only my father used. But my father had passed away in a car accident 10 years ago, on this very road. Look closer at the driver, Leo, the voice urged. I grabbed my binoculars. Through the cracked windshield of the car, I saw the driver. He was slumped over the steering wheel, his head tilted back. Even from this distance, I could see he wasn't moving. But what made my heart stop was his hand. He was holding a cell phone to his ear. And then the driver slowly lifted his head. His face was a mangled mess of blood and bone, but he was staring directly up at my window. As he looked at me, he didn't use the phone to speak. He opened his mouth, and the sound came directly through my studio monitors. The loop is closing, Leo, he whispered. 10 years ago, I called you. 10 years ago, you didn't answer. But tonight, you picked up. Suddenly, the streetlights outside began to flicker and die one by one. The black sedan started to fade, becoming translucent. I watched in horror as the car and the body inside began to merge with the air itself. The caller's voice on my headset changed. It wasn't my father anymore. It was my own voice. Leo, look at your hands, the voice said from the speaker. I looked down. My hands were covered in fresh blood. I felt a sharp, burning pain in my chest. I looked at the studio window again, but I wasn't inside the station anymore. I was sitting in the driver's seat of a black sedan, the steering column crushed against my ribs. I looked up at the station window and saw myself, another Leo, standing there with binoculars, looking down at me in horror. The power in the station surged, the monitors exploded in sparks, and the line went dead. When the police arrived minutes later, they found a body from an accident that had happened 10 years ago, freshly bleeding as if it had just occurred. And in the studio upstairs, the chair was empty, the headset was still swinging, and the tape recorder was stuck in a loop, playing the sound of 1,000 souls screaming at once. My name is David, and I've been driving for Uber in Chicago for 3 years. I thought I'd seen everything: drunk tourists, weeping breakups, even a guy who tried to transport a live goat. But none of that compares to the ride I picked up at 2:14 a.m. last Thursday. I was about to log off when a request popped up. The pickup was in a quiet, older neighborhood where the streetlights are spaced too far apart. The rider's name was just M. When I pulled up to the curb, a woman was already standing there. She was wearing a long vintage gray coat and a silk scarf wrapped loosely around her head. She didn't wait for me to unlock the doors. She just opened the back left door and slid in. Heading to Blackwood Drive? I asked, looking at the app. She didn't speak. She just pointed a thin, pale finger straight ahead. Her skin looked like parchment, dry and unnaturally white. I shrugged, thinking she was just tired or perhaps didn't speak English, and started the trip. The car was silent. Usually, I can hear a passenger breathing or the rustle of their clothes, but it was like the back seat was a vacuum. I tried to make small talk to break the ice. Cold night for April, isn't it? I said, glancing at the rearview mirror. My heart nearly stopped. I blinked, then stared harder. The rearview mirror showed an empty back seat. I could see the headrests, the seat belts, and the floor mats clearly, but there was no woman. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I slowly turned my head and looked over my shoulder, fully expecting to see nothing. But she was there. She was sitting perfectly still, staring straight through the windshield with wide, unblinking eyes. I looked back at the mirror. Empty. I looked over my shoulder again. She was there. My breath began to hitch. I wanted to scream, to jump out of the moving car, but my legs felt like lead. I looked back at the mirror once more. This time, I saw something else. On the empty seat in the reflection, a dark, wet stain was slowly spreading across the fabric, right where she was supposed to be sitting. It looked like old, stagnant water mixed with oil. "Ma'am," I whispered, my voice cracking. Are you okay?" She slowly raised her hand. She didn't point forward this time. She pointed at the rearview mirror. I looked. In the mirror, where the seat should have been empty, I now saw her reflection. But it wasn't the woman in the gray coat. It was a bloated, waterlogged corpse with tangled hair and skin that was sloughing off in gray patches. Her mouth was open in a silent, jagged scream. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. We had reached the destination. I looked out the window. We were standing in front of the rusted iron gates of the St. Jude Cemetery. The GPS voice, which usually sounds so helpful, suddenly turned into a distorted, low-pitched growl. "You have arrived at your final destination." The back door clicked open. I watched the woman step out of the car. As she walked toward the cemetery gates, she didn't leave footprints on the gravel. Instead, she left a trail of wet black sludge. She stopped at the gate and turned around. For the first time, she looked me directly in the eyes. Her face was no longer the pale woman or the corpse. It was a mirror image of my own face, but twisted in a mask of pure agony. "The fare hasn't been paid, David," she whispered, her voice echoing inside my own head. She stepped through the locked iron bars of the gate as if they were made of smoke and vanished into the fog of the gravestones. I sped away, my engine roaring. When I finally got home, I checked my Uber app to report the incident. The trip history was empty. No M, no Blackwood Drive, no earnings. But when I walked to the back of my car, I found the back seat was soaking wet, and resting on the floor mat was a single rusted funeral coin from 1924. I don't drive at night anymore, because every time I look in my rearview mirror, Even when I'm alone, I can still see a pale finger in the corner of the frame, pointing straight at me.